As a child, I always wondered that why I was 1/5 of the world population that had the misfortune to be born in China. As many of you who know me probably wouldn't expect that I actually hated China. I was watching all the Western news thinking that, oh, that's a democratic society, therefore their news about China must be very correct because my government is corrupt and whatever, I should not believe, not even believing what I see. And I came to the US at the age of 19 to Richmond, Indiana, first time being abroad, and I felt that it was a cool thing for me to do, to criticize China. And people applauded me for it. And at a larger context, I start to realize that in this society, or in the Western society in general, has a tendency to demonize China, in the sense that saying that because China is not a democratic country, and so the things that they do is evil, and we would like to believe in those things are evil because it's not a democratic country. And coming along with that notion, certain predictions came, such as there's a political scientist called Professor Fukuyama. He made a speech. He wrote a book called The End of History. Basically, after the Soviet Union collapsed, he predicted that all countries will gradually transform into democracies. And then this person here is called Gordon Chang, a lawyer and a TV pundit. He wrote the book called The Coming Collapse of China, predicted that China will collapse in a few years. He made that prediction in 2002, 2005, 2011, 2012, and 2016. Each time with a different timeline proposed because his previous timeline has already expired. So, and he's still talking on CNN or on Fox News making anti-China rhetorics. If you look at his Twitter, everything is the typical criticism that you would find. So has China, back to my personal story. So what happened to the anti-China version of Derek? Why did I become this, how people might perceive it as extremely blindly patriotic Derek? As I start to see this difference in my personal experience in my 18 years in China and the narratives in the Western criticism, I start to find there's a huge discrepancy. And that drove my curiosity to learn more and more. And as I did a lot of research throughout the years, I start to find a lot of those criticisms are actually not fully supported. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So has China collapsed? No. And there are certain things that are considered quite unexpected, at least unheard. Every single year, if you have been to any of the world famous tourist spots, you probably have seen Chinese tourists everywhere, right? And 120 million people, travelers, leave China each year to travel to all over the world. Guess how many return? Assuming that this is a dark, evil, corrupt country without any freedom at all. 100 million, 20 people return each year. Well, you can see currently in some Middle Eastern countries that are supposedly getting democratized with the Westerners' help, the refugees are flooding into the more developed European nations. There is a Pew Research Center. It's one of the biggest international public opinion survey agency that they did this research asking people, are you satisfied with your country's direction? In this ranking, China ranks #1 with 85%, and Malaysia ranks 82, and Germany ranks 57%, #3. While the US, the statistic is 31% and ranks a little bit lower than the top. In the UK, around a bit more than 20%. So why is there a discrepancy between some people's personal experiences and the outside narrative of China? Why is there such a veil that prevents people from seeing the actual image? I contribute that to mainly 2 reasons. One, ideology biases. When I talk about ideology biases, is that people in the West tend to distrust information coming from a non-democratic government. What narrative you would also hear is that because China is a non-democratic country, no, first of all, they would criticize China, saying that you got human rights problem, this problem, that problem, and then China comes out and defends itself with information, whatever, and then the critics would say, you guys are not a democratic government, so that whatever information is not trustworthy. Then the critics would invent their own narrative, their own facts to prove their own argument. So it's like a closed loop, a vicious cycle where the outside information is blocked simply because their government is different. There is a sense of superiority in saying that this is the ultimate government form. And without even knowing how does the other societies work, we decided that's gonna be how we think of them. Media biases. This is probably very unknown to a lot of people as that it feels like the China rhetoric is more of a uniform thing instead of having two sides debate in the US or in the West. Have you seen the red X? That is actually a demonetization sign on YouTube. And when I watch years of YouTube, spending thousands of hours on YouTube, I've only noticed one category that get demonetized most often. Videos that are either made by YouTubers from China or people or YouTubers that tries to defend China or defend China or the pro-China ones. Their video are often having this red tick, meaning that their video will not be compensated with ad revenue to sustain their operation. Second thing is that they will never pop up on your feed. They will never be automatically pop up on your feed, meaning that unless you know them already, you'll never get to know them. And there's one video who makes video, they are Chinese rising media. They make videos on China, all kinds of ask politics, health, even coronavirus. And every single week, they have at least 2 videos getting taken off of the list for very weird reasons. They actually have a playlist that's called restricted video list, because it was so many. And if you Google China after this talk or something, I can confidently say that you probably will find, out of 10 results, you will find less than 2 that are positive about China. And what's even more interesting is that when you type the word China in Chinese in Google, in the top stories, overwhelmingly are from a Western source, like Deutsche Welle or Voice of America or CNN China, those things. Somehow, magically, every single mainstream Chinese media is filtered out. So I'm going to provide you guys a few more examples to understand the Chinese political system and what kind of things it does to try to see what's something that people might have never heard before. We all know this guy, right? The Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. We often know him as the dictator, the emperor, the exploitative leader who controls the people to benefit the party, right? But people might not know is that he had 30 years of political experience before he climbed up to the current ranking today. He started from the very, very basic level of the village manager, then climbing up to the town manager, provincial manager, and then a few other ranks before he became the person today. And during that 30 years, he has managed 150 million people and $1.5 trillion of economy. That economy is roughly the size of the whole country of Canada or the whole country of Australia. So why do I write meritocracy and how that meritocratic system is designed? The biggest human resource organization in this world is actually the Chinese Communist Party organizational department, where they are in charge of designing a system to ensure the people get the most capable leader to direct the country. So as you can see in this pyramid, from the basic level to the top level, we have 90,000 people, 900,000 people from co-level and 600,000 people from true level, and rising further up, becoming less and less. After the Ju level, the green one, you climb up a few ranks, you go to the central group of people called the Central Politburo. these are the people who are like the board of trustee of the whole Chinese government, And not known to many people, just like President Xi, they on average have 10 years of provincial governance experience before they climb up to this position, meaning that they have ran a country, they have ran a population that's similar to a country like France before they become the central power. And they've climbed all the way through the bottom of the ranks to the top rank. So you expect that at least they will have a good understanding of what the basic people's needs are to balance the overall picture. Then how does the government serve the people? A few more detailed examples would be, we have full electricity coverage in 2015. How is that supposed to be impressive statistics? Well, if you are a private, most electricity companies in the West are private companies. They would go for, their priority is profit. So they would go to places that are easy to build electricity, for example, and when you have a place that's, for example, a high mountain, only a few people live there. They probably would just ignore that place and encourage people to move away from their home. Well, in China, because the electricity network is actually a government-owned agency, its priority is to ensure full coverage of electricity in China. Therefore, places as high as Himalayas must be covered as well. And you see that recently we have the coronavirus thing going around. Chinese government actually provides free treatment and diagnosis for everybody, and in the meantime mobilizing resources, sending in a bunch of the Communist Party members and including military medical personnel to the most infected places to help out. And China's government is also a responsive government, which is a characteristic you would only imagine exist in a democratic society. As a kid, before I came to the US, I received numerous phone calls. They would call me and ask me, what do you think of the new garbage collection policy? Where do you think the country is going, how do you think the country is going? Are you having a happy life? And every time I felt extremely disappointed because I was underage. And every time they asked me the question, and they asked me, how old are you? And I said, I'm 17. And now that I'm in the US, so I never get to hear those calls again. So the Chinese government is actually the biggest customer of the biggest public survey company in China. Not from the state level to provincial level to town level, all of them uses the public survey in order to ensure when they're making decisions, they get the necessary information. So what has the government done at a large scale? Average life expectancy has risen from 1949's 35 years old on average. Just imagine you have a life of 35 years old, or even less because it's the average, to now 77 years old. And we have almost free college tuition. I went to China's university for 1 year, and I paid like $300, $400. In China, it is an absurd concept that we have to prioritize cost considerations over merit considerations when it comes to higher education. When you have, a more balanced system that allow the poor people to move up, you have a better social mobility, and that ensures the people's happiness. Kind of going back to the point why people are happy with their life. 850 million people have been lifted out of extreme poverty, according to the World Bank standard. And the extreme poverty rate has started from 88% in 1981 to around 0.7%, which is expected to be eliminated by the end of 2020. And guess how much does that world poverty lifting contributed to the world poverty lifted in the past 30 years? It's actually 75% of the world poverty lifted are done by China. Well, you can see the red one says other socialist countries have 3%, and capitalist countries combined have 22% contributed. And regarding to the threat theory, China is often considered a threat. I'm quoting a few people to provide another side of perspective. Responding to the political threat, the Chinese President Xi Jinping said, first, China does not export revolution. Second, it does not export famine and poverty. Third, it does not mess with your internal affairs. Responding to the security threat, Tim Cook, when people asked him, oh, has China asked you to put surveillance on your phone? He actually said that China has never asked us to unlock the iPhone, but the US has asked for it. And responding to the colonial threat, Malaysia is not famous for the most pro-China country, but the former Malaysian Prime Minister, Matahir, said that we have had China as a neighbor for 2,000 years. We were never conquered by them, but the Europeans came in 1509, and in 2 years, they conquered Malaysia. China's attitude, of course, is to gain as much influence as possible. So far, China does not seem to want to build an empire. This was said 2 years ago. And Martin Yack, a columnist for The Guardian of London and a visiting scholar of the London School of Economics, said this, a very more in-depth analysis. There's no real history apart from the imperial expansion as the Chinese empire grew in the early period. There's no real examples of China invading other countries. And even when they did invade, for example, Vietnam in the early part of the 15th century, it didn't stay there. It came out again straight away. So it was that a form of punishment, if you like, rather than an invasion. So there was no tradition of China in developing colonies abroad which it controlled, it ran, which were part of the Chinese empire. Basically, all the major top global powers, especially America and Britain before that, have been Western powers. And they have brought to the way they saw global leadership, global dominance. They have brought their own values and their own history. And China comes from something very different. The problem is that most people in this world, of course, do not really know much about China. So if you look at these two cute cat pictures, one of them is a black cat, the other one is a white cat. One of the leader of Communist Party, Deng Xiaoping, he said this famously, black cat or white cat, as long as it catches the mice, it's a good cat. When people were criticizing China for being this model, for being too capitalist, for being too communist, he said, as long as we serve the people, that's the end goal. Sometimes in politics, we got too trapped up into which way we go, and the results sometimes get admitted. Zhang Wenwei, a research fellow and professor at Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations, mentioned the standard of good governance and bad governance. Use this as the standard to measure governance instead of using, if you're a democratic country, then you must be a good government. If you're not a democratic country, then you must be a bad government. So after saying all those good things about China, is China irreproachable? Is China perfect? My firm answer to that would be no. As that, I'm mainly including the positive side today to provide another side of narrative. The Western media has done a much better job than me in terms of covering all the negative sides of China. So universal imperfect system does not exist. System needs to be updated always. And many other doubts unaddressed in this talk, but I hope one of the fundamental misunderstandings can be addressed, in a sense, giving you and opening you up for another set of possibilities for other controversial topics. There's, to end my presentation with a story. That's the guy in the middle. He's director James Gates. He came to the Earlham campus twice. He makes China and US relationship documentaries. He went to China many, many times. He worked in the US for decades for Goldman Sachs. He said this, people in the US know much less about China in comparison to how much the Chinese people know about the US. And I think misunderstanding is the key reasons why we hate, and therefore the key reason for conflict. Often in this further more and more globalized world, we tend to put labels. We tend to put labels on things. Then we say, okay, that label is there, so we'll never think of it again. But actually, in this more and more globalized world, more and more interactions will need to happen. I'm not in the place to tell you what to do, but I truly recommend us to look at another side of story, to ask the question, what if? Thank you.